This is a radio. It's a technology I use primarily when I've already sat down and don't want to get my phone out of my pocket. Last year, I would always turn the radio to pop. But here's the thing, it was always the same song. Now Charlie Puth is gonna turn us on with his light switch. Now here's the Puthster.
Oh my gosh, again? How many times are you gonna play this song? Walk away, you turn me on the light switch.
And every commercial radio station in every single city seems like it's the same. Why? This is an American story about commercial radio that I want to tell in 3 main sections. So let's get started and talk about etheric bedlam. Imagine you're a 1900s radio guy. This is as advanced as technology will ever be. Also, there will never be wars. And no pandemics. Okay, back to work. You're probably sending mainly Morse code, but the problem is that your signal is competing against lots of other radio signals. The frequencies are unregulated. Anybody can be on, say, 11:30 a.m. Lots of people hate that. The Navy, for example, is worried that distress calls from ships will get lost in what they call etheric bedlam. I promise it is actually kind of necessary to go this far back to answer the question of why every radio station sounds the same today. Congress passed an act saying radio stations have to be licensed. Goodbye bedlam. This later got followed up by a new law creating a Federal Radio Commission, which then turned into the FCC with the Communications Act of 1934. Radio stations that were commercial started to rise against educational or religious stations. Crucially, ownership was also limited by the FCC. Rules lessened over time, but it's fair to imagine a cap of 2 AM and FM radio stations in one market and 40 nationwide, as far as what one company could own. I just want to hit home why they felt they needed to regulate this because it depended on actual radio waves. This was an FCC monitoring station in Grand Island, Nebraska, where they were just listening for radio waves that might be breaking rules. And this 1934 map really gives you a sense of things. It stacks AM radio stations by the power of their transmissions, A being a supercharged or broad station, H probably being a hyperlocal one. And down here, you see a reminder that this was a medium based on distance from these transmission areas, with rough yardsticks as estimates. For the next 60 years, I'd argue that this is pretty much how things work. I mean, there were blips of change. FM radio showed up, though it took a surprisingly long time to become dominant. In 1968, it was still only 15% of listeners. Public radio was established in the 60s and started in the 70s. And syndication became a popular format. Here's an NBC News pamphlet trying to convince stations to switch to all-news radio and buy their shows to do it. But even though these were big changes, the status quo of ownership mostly stuck, and that affected the music. Imagine you're a 1960s radio DJ. You work for a pretty local and relatively small company, so you are in tune with local consumers. Record companies have to individually solicit attention to their songs. And you can also just put in whatever you want if you feel like it. Even if you wanted to copy the mainstream, it was a lot harder. This is a 1973 issue of Radio and Records, an industry magazine. They had a whole section called Parallels, in which you could browse charts for ideas, but also find radio stations parallel to your own. So you could be like, oh, okay, I guess WHBQ is playing Chris Christopherson's Why Me, so maybe I'll give that a try. So through the 90s, you could find a DJ like this. Okay, Tuscaloosa, I've completely outsourced my mind to the pop charts, so here's the same song you heard yesterday. But one station over, you might find a DJ who would say this. I've completely outsourced my mind to hallucinogenic plants, so here's a song you'll never want to hear again. FCC ownership rules had this result that, to me, was kind of unpredictable. It meant that commercial radio could actually be unique. That is, until 1996.
Downloading images of global climate change again?
Here's VP Al Gore, here's President Bill Clinton.
You're not stiff. You're just a techno nerd.
So this is part of a very long skit that the vice president and president did with Lily Tomlin to, I don't know, amuse people before they signed their huge telecommunications bill.
I thank Lily Tomlin for reminding us that the internet can be fun.
They were there to sign the Telecommunications Act of 1996.
Whatever the reason, though, the Communications Act of 1934 was born without much fanfare. It will not pass on the same way.
Now, this act did a ton of stuff that is outside the scope of our narrow focus on why every radio station sounds the same. They sort of cast it as an information superhighway bill, which is why they used the same pen that Dwight D. Eisenhower used to create the highway system.
That's the time when people in Washington were real leaders and pens were real pens.
So now I'm going to explain every intricate aspect of this law.
No, you tell me why the songs are the same, why I'm stuck in light switch limbo. That's what I need to know.
Okay. So there had been tweaks to FCC rules before around spectrum auctions, which kind of favored parties that had more money, but the Telecommunications Act smashed all that regulation. The national ownership cap was unlimited, and local markets could own as many as 8 or more stations, depending on the market. The effects were, and I'm not exaggerating here, they were immediate. Broadcasting cable reported on mega weeks in which huge consolidation occurred. Let the deals begin. This changed everything. Radio owners got really, really big. Clear Channel, today you might know it as iHeart, became the biggest station owner, going from 173 stations to 1,207 stations in just 7 years. But consolidation was bigger than one company. So how did this affect music? I like the description in this paper by a guy who actually worked in promotions at music companies before writing this paper. Instead of cultivating relationships with individual radio stations, music companies were now pressured to develop relationships with radio station groups. Now you needed to convince one person, the person at the big radio company, instead of 1,000 different DJs. And you could get the same airplay. A station group will conceivably save on music format research. Remember parallels? Now you didn't need parallels because you owned all the parallel stations. They knew what songs worked, and they could just repeat that formula, plop the songs across the country. And a group can downsize its air staff with the advent of voice track automation. Suddenly there was no reason to remain local because you could pipe in outside DJs from wherever you wanted. This New York Times article shares an anecdote that became universal, streaming in disc jockeys from outside local markets. Clear Channel wants to replace live jockeys with prepackaged shows that use voice tracking. Stations could also save money on jingles and sweepers through consolidation. You know, this kind of thing. You're listening to The Fuzz. Top 40 hits that are gonna blow your mind. We're coming straight to you.
From beautiful Tuscaloosa.
For the top 40, as quickly as 1999, adult contemporary was majority controlled by just 4 groups. Let's say A and B are big radio owners. A record company might promise them both performances and tickets if they play this song. So they plop the song in the markets they own. Station to station, the songs are the same. The same songs are getting piped out to the stations. Then the internet exacerbated those trends.
What if there was a song that started off like boop 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 boop?
That Charlie Puth song that I kept hearing on the radio, it was actually part of a TikTok campaign. I was really trying to make it go viral.
This is actually kind of dope. I'm freaking out right now.
This is so obviously fake.
It's literally my record label calling.
Come on, Charlie, you're almost done with the song.
But it totally worked. He went up to the top of the charts. TikTok drives charts, YouTube drives charts, and radio is in decline. Radio played Light Switch because it was a hit on TikTok, and their only hope in a declining market is to catch you really quickly. Now, a few caveats. Now, my whole video is premised on radio being this kind of like totally outdated curio, and I think maybe I'm in a bit of a bubble. If you look at statistics, revenue for the industry still tops $10 billion a year, somehow. And let's throw aside listener-supported radio, there is good commercial radio out there. When I was starting to research this, I tuned into a DJ set by DJ XXL. The station he plays on, it's actually owned by iHeart, aka Clear Channel. I'm a dork, but I was enjoying it. I was grooving to it. But unfortunately, sets like that are kind of a rarity, at least for now. Modern program directors will tell you that they are basically playing the same 10 to 20 songs because they have to capture people on their commute. All those reasons are the reason that every radio station sounds the same, and radio knows it too. They just hope that we can't get our phones out of our pockets.
You turn me on like a light switch.
All right, that is it for this one. Thank you for watching. If you haven't been here before, this is a personal channel where I post personal videos, history videos, stuff like that. This really came from my own interest in why radio stations sound so similar. Did a lot of research for it. Links to papers and sources are down in the description. I also have a video over on Patreon where I kind of react and tell you the things that I left out. I'm a committed radio listener. I mean, that radio that I use in the video, that's my radio. It sits in my dining room and I enjoy listening to radio. So I do have hope for the medium, but I'd be interested to know what you think that I left out, or, if I wasn't being fair in certain places. And otherwise, thank you for watching. I will see you in the next one. And I guess let's have Light Switch play me out. Why not, huh?